One plate was set, but the fork never came, and neither did its guest. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I'm your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. This growing circle of mystery lovers is incredible. Your comments always make my day. Let's begin. If you want a test case in how fast my employer can make something both trivial and momentous, I'll offer you last Tuesday at lunch. The roast capon had just reached that stage where the skin crackled under the knife like a polite applause, and Fritz was positively glowing at his own handiwork. I was halfway through admiring the second helping on my plate when Wolfe made a sound that was closer to a grunt than a word. Now, Nero Wolfe doesn't grunt at food. He may grumble at people, politics, and the fate of the world outside his brown stone, but when it comes to anything served at his table, the man is reverent. So when his eyes narrowed and his head tilted toward the setting before him, I knew something had gone wrong in Eden. The plate in front of him was perfect. Golden meat, gravy with Fritz's signature depth, and vegetables arranged like they were auditioning for a still life. What wasn't perfect was the gap. The fork, his fork, was absent. To you or me, that would mean a signal to Fritz or a minor inconvenience. To Wolfe, it was as if a priest had discovered the altar cloth missing during Mass. He sat still, breathing through his nose like a bull about to charge. "Archie," he said at last, with the tone of a man ordering the siege of a city. "Yes, sir." "My fork. Now, I've handled missing spoons, cracked glasses, and once a burnt souffle that nearly sparked a diplomatic incident between Wolfe and Fritz. But I had to admit, this was a new one. I rose, did a quick survey of the table, and found the lineup of utensils present and accounted for, except his. No fork on the table, none on the tray. Even Fritz, when summoned, looked blank, as though we'd accused him of arson. "I said it myself, Mr. Wolfe," Fritz insisted, his accent sharp with offense. The silver was polished. "Every place correct. You were interrupted?" Wolfe asked. "No, sir." Wolfe leaned back, folded his arms, and regarded the table as though it had just tried to play him false. A plate without a fork. Remarkable. Now, if you know Nero Wolfe, you know that what most men would consider a hiccup, he can turn into a hanging offense. His rules are his laws, and his dining table is Rome. The more I thought about it, though, the stranger it felt. We don't keep casual visitors at lunch. Fritz isn't absent-minded. And nobody, but nobody, tampers with Wolfe's sacred hour without consequence. "It walked off on its own," I offered, trying to keep the tone light. He ignored me. His eyes had gone still and bright in that way that usually means somebody's in for a long afternoon. "This house," he said slowly, "is inviolate. Unless it is not." That was when the doorbell rang. I glanced at Wolfe. He closed his eyes, as if the bell had been timed for maximum insult. "Get it, Archie." I did. On the stoop was a woman who looked as if she had dressed for a meeting and lost her nerve halfway through. Smart coat, but a tremor in her hands as she clutched her bag. She asked for Nero Wolfe in a voice that suggested she wasn't sure if she was about to be laughed at or arrested. I brought her in. She introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Renshaw and said, "Mr. Wolfe, I wouldn't come if it weren't, well, peculiar. Something has been moved in my house. Not stolen, moved. And it isn't the first time Wolfe didn't stir. And you thought I should be disturbed with this peculiarity?" She hesitated. "Because today, Mr. Wolfe, it was at my table. A plate left without a fork, I don't need to tell you the look Wolfe gave me. He didn't smile. He didn't twitch, but if you'd bet against him taking the case, you'd have lost your shirt. I took her coat because Fritz was still in a state, and a woman like Mrs. Renshaw looked as if she'd faint sooner than hand a garment to anyone but a gentleman. We went to the office. Wolfe was already in his chair behind the desk, hands laid on the blotter as if it were a chest he meant to keep anyone from opening. The room had that neat, uncompromising look it gets after lunch. No stray magazines, no pens left on the arm of the red leather chair, the globe bar shut tight, the only thing out of sorts being Wolfe himself. He watched her come in and sit, and if he cared that a stranger had just marched through his sacred postprandial zone, he kept it on ice. "Your name," he said. "Eleanor Renshaw." She said it like a signature she'd written too many times today. "Your situation," he said. She moistened her lips. "I live on East 73rd, a townhouse. My husband died last year. I've stayed on. It's a large house, too large for one woman, yes, but I have help. A housekeeper, a cook, a driver sometimes, a secretary who comes 4 days a week. I'm on the board of a small arts foundation. I entertain, but not flamboyantly. I'm not careless, and I've never been nervous. But in the last month, things have moved." "Be specific," Wolfe said, which was predictable. So I got the notebook. "3 weeks ago," she said, "the silver cigarette case my husband kept on the parlor mantel shifted to the left. 2 inches. You think I'm being silly. It wasn't the cleaner. Mrs. Creeley is meticulous. The next day, a photograph of my mother, its frame, was turned so the clasp faced the room, not the wall. Nothing broken, nothing taken. Then, in my study, I keep correspondence in a pigeonhole desk. The top layer of letters had been rearranged by date, but the bottom layer hadn't been touched. "You share keys?" Wolfe asked. "No. The staff have their own. There's an alarm. It logs entries. My stepson, Victor, has a key but never comes without telling me." Not lately. Her mouth made a shape at that and changed its mind. "And today," Wolfe said, "a plate was without a fork." She nodded. "I had 4 people to lunch, not formal. Soup, a cold salmon, a salad, tarts. The places were set in the dining room, 5 in all. We took our seats. Everyone had what they needed, except the place to my right. The fork was missing. I thought nothing of it. Annabelle, my secretary, would fetch another, but she was as startled as I was. She swore she'd set them herself. The tray held the exact count. 5 knives, 5 spoons, 4 forks, names, Wolfe said. All. "Victor Renshaw," she said and glanced at me. He and I are not close. He runs a venture fund. He thinks the house should be sold. Annabelle Lewis, my secretary. She's competent and loyal. Calvin Yarrow, the foundation's treasurer. He had some figures to review with me ahead of a meeting. And Ludo Carbone, my cook, because he refuses to be invisible when he's proud of a dish. He eats with us sometimes. He's temperamental, but I trust him with my life and foie gras. "And the missing fork was at which place?" Wolfe asked. "Calvin's," she said, "to my right." I wrote the names, the fork's destination, the courses, and the impression that Mrs. Renshaw trusted everyone and no one in equal measure. If you're thinking this sounded like the kind of complaint that keeps a parlour-maid awake and a detective asleep, you don't work for Nero Wolfe. He had settled into that deep-breathing stillness that means he's running through possibilities and discarding most. The fork on our table had not been absent by negligence. He had made that plain without saying a word. If the same message had been delivered at a stranger's table at the same hour, a man like Wolfe could call that coincidence and still get indigestion. "Prior to lunch," he said, "who entered the dining room after the table was set?" "Mrs. Creeley, to confirm the covers. Ludo, to sneeze at the flowers. Annabelle, to place the seating cards. I use them when Victor comes, so there's no argument about who sits where. And I looked in myself. The forks were their seating cards," Wolfe repeated. "What did they say?" "Names," she said, surprised. "Just the names." "Printed or written?" "Written. In my hand." "Where are they now?" "At home. I saved them, though I don't know why. You know why," Wolfe said curtly, and she flinched as if he'd tapped her with a ruler. "Other incidents. Have you told all?" She hesitated. One more. I keep a safe in my bedroom, not jewelry, documents. A codicil to my will. I changed it after my husband's death and before the Foundation renewed my term. It concerns the disposition of my collection. The envelope was resealed with a different pressure. You can feel such things if you've sealed enough. The flap had been lifted and closed again. The document itself was not exactly where I'd placed it. A half-inch to the right, I felt Wolfe's eyes on me, which is often my cue to remember where I left my hat because I'll be using it in 5 minutes. He said, "Who knows of this codicil?" "My lawyer," she said, "a Mr. Dell, and me. And, well, I suppose my stepson assumes such things exist. We are not in the habit of confiding. You have described not theft, but trespass," Wolfe said. "A mind has imposed itself on your arrangements. The fork was not an omission. It was an emblem." She looked at him as if he'd named a species she'd been smelling for weeks. "Then you'll take it." "I will consider it," he said, which for him is practically a signed contract with a bouquet on it. You are being harried, not to impoverish you, but to unnerve you, to signal access. To suggest that your house and your decisions may be shepherded by hands other than yours. That is obnoxious. His eyes slid to me. "Archie," I closed the notebook. "Yes, sir." "You will go to Mrs. Renshaw's townhouse. You will examine the dining room, the mantel, the desk, the safe. You will observe the staff. You will not discuss the codicil. You will secure the seating cards and the luncheon silver, especially the absent fork if it has been found, which it has not." He returned to her. "Has it?" "No." Her fingers tightened on her bag. We searched the room. It was simply not there. The doorbell hit another note. Fritz materialized, and I started to rise, but he had already crossed to the hall. A moment later, he ushered in a man whose suit announced money and whose expression announced he was used to a faster reception than he'd gotten. "Mrs. Renshaw," he said, neither waiting to be introduced nor asking permission. "You asked me to give you the revised figures, and then you disappear." Oh, his eyes landed on Wolfe and then on me. "So this is—" "Mr. Yarrow," she said, getting up halfway, then not finishing. "Calvin, please." I sat back down. Wolfe did not get up. He never does for a treasurer, unless the treasurer is bringing foie gras on a silver salver. "Mr. Yarrow," he said, "you were at lunch today. Sit. Or don't. But if you're in this room, you will not speak until I've asked you to." Yarrow's mouth opened and then shut. He looked at me, decided I wasn't a chair, and took one anyway. The room shifted. We'd gone from private complaint to a small assembly, and the brownstone, which resents being used as anyone's parlor, let us all know it. "Mr. Wolfe," Mrs. Renshaw said softly, "I cannot bear this continuing. The house feels watched. My decisions feel guessed in advance. I don't know if the fork was aimed at Calvin or if it was at me. I only know I can't sleep." "Sleep," Wolfe said, "is a sovereign right. You will leave a retainer with Mr. Goodwin." He flicked 2 fingers, meaning an amount that would make a treasurer breathe through his teeth. "And you will go home and resume your routine as if nothing had occurred. Mr. Goodwin will observe and inquire. You will not announce that you have engaged me. If asked, say that you have invited a friend for tea." "Mr. Yarrow." "Yes," Yarrow said. "You will tell me whether the Foundation's accounts afford you opportunity," Wolfe said, "to anticipate Mrs. Renshaw's decisions before she makes them." "Speak plainly," Yarrow colored. "I handle reports. I do not handle Mrs. Renshaw, and if this is about the fork, I don't pick at silver, I pick at numbers." "Good," Wolfe said. "Then you won't mind if your numbers are handled by someone else for the next few days." Yarrow didn't like it, which put him in a large club. He glanced at Mrs. Renshaw, found no help there, and sat back. Wolfe closed his eyes, opened them, and reached for the bell cord. "Fritz," he called when the man appeared, "my lunch will be resumed." Bring a fork. You could have called that a joke if you wanted to be brave. I pocketed the notebook and stood. Mrs. Renshaw looked steadier, which is one service clients think they're paying for, and sometimes are. I told her I'd be right behind, and asked for the address. She gave it. Yarrow rose with her, shot me a look that asked what kind of circus this was, and got the kind of look back that says it's the kind where we sell tickets and you can buy one or go home. In the hall I helped with her coat. "Archie," she said low, "if this is petty, if I've wasted your time—" "Lady," I told her, opening the door. "Around here, a fork can be a felony. We'll see you in 20 minutes. Behind me, I could hear the chime of cutlery as Fritz complied with the bell and placed order back where order belonged. If whoever was leaving messages thought a brownstone would be an easy church to desecrate, they hadn't met the man in the chair. And if they had, they'd forgotten about the man with the hat. Mrs. Renshaw's house had the tidy look of money that knows the value of soap. The driver wasn't in evidence. The doorman down the block gave me a look that said he knew every car on the street and didn't like mine. Inside, the foyer was marble that had been buffed recently enough to make a man watch his heels. She took me straight to the dining room because once a thing works its way into a woman's table, manners it doesn't leave by the front door. The room was high-ceilinged and in good taste, which means the frames matched and the flowers didn't try to be operatic. The table was bare now, but the sideboard held the silver chest like a casket waiting for mourners. Mrs. Creeley, the housekeeper, arrived with a key. She was the kind of precise that makes scissors nervous. She set the chest down, opened it, and we counted. 8 dinner forks in the set should have been 7 present. The slots were fitted velvet, one gap like a missing tooth. I asked where the luncheon forks lived and got a look that questioned my birth. Same chest, different section, those were accounted for. This had been a dinner fork, used at lunch because the cold salmon had ambition. "You cleaned all this afterward," I said. "Of course," she said. "Mr. Yarrow left first. Then Miss Lewis. Then Mr. Victor. Mr. Carbone had the kitchen. I cleared the table with Annabelle's help. And you didn't find the fork under a napkin or gone for a ride in a tart? You checked the trash? The sink trap?" Her mouth thinned. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm a housekeeper, not a juggler. Nothing leaves my table by accident." "Sure," I said, and let the chest close with a gentle sound. "Show me the tablecloth." She'd had it folded for laundry, which was good for me because creases tell tales. We spread it over the table, and I took my time with the places as she called them out. Mrs. Renshaw had kept the seating cards, and they came in a small envelope from her desk. We laid them where they'd been. Mrs. Renshaw at the head, Yarrow at her right, Victor on her left, Annabelle beyond Victor, and Ludo nearest the sideboard so he could compliment his own salmon without shouting. No fork at Yarrow's place at the time of service. Now, the cloth showed faint impressions from the other settings where forks had rested, a little shine where knife blades had kissed fabric. At Yarrow's spot, there was only a shallow line from the knife, no twin from a fork. That was consistent and not helpful. The napkin had a crease that said it had been unfolded and refolded once. I checked others. They said the same. If a magician had palmed a fork, he'd done it before anyone was seated or while the house was still breathing in. "Where were the cards kept before you wrote them?" I asked Mrs. Renshaw. "In the little drawer of the sideboard," she said. "How long?" "A month. I keep a supply." I took Yarrow's card and held it up to the window. The paper was good stock. You could have used it for apologies. Under the ink, her hand, looping and sure, there were faint grooves, the kind that come from writing on a stack. I fetched a pencil from my pocket and shaded lightly over the back, a trick I've used when someone swears they never wrote the word I-O-U. The ghost lines came up as a weak relief. On the card that had read Calvin, the pressure pattern beneath suggested the card above it had had a shorter name. The grooves didn't say whose, but they curved in a way that matched a V climbing. It could have been Victor, or it could have been my imagination getting cocky. I checked the others. On Victor, there were long stems that might have belonged to Annabelle. On Annabelle, there was nothing I could make into music. Annabelle wrote at the table? I asked. I did, Mrs. Renshaw said, just before lunch. I wanted Victor and Calvin separated. Who placed them? Annabelle. So Annabelle wrote the cards. She had said she wrote them. If she wrote and Annabelle placed, the cards had 2 stops before the chairs. I slipped the set into an envelope I had brought for that very hobby and labeled it in my block print. It's not art, but juries like it. Next stop was the parlor mantel where the cigarette case had made its 2-inch stroll. The mantel wore the line of dust and polish that tells you where things usually live. The case's new spot didn't leave a brighter rectangle because everything around here gets wiped daily. But on the back edge of the case, there was a faint drag of lemon oil that hadn't had time to gather dust. I sniffed and got the kitchen at 10 in the morning. Ludo uses lemon oil on the butcher's block when he thinks nobody's looking. It makes him feel Mediterranean. That didn't prove he was the one who moved the case. It proved the house was the size of a village and everyone borrowed each other's shadows. The study desk was next. It had pigeonholes that made a man want to write letters just to give them a home. The top layer of correspondence was arranged by date, all very proper. The second layer added whimsy. I slid the top packet aside and saw the bottom still in its previous chaos. Whoever had done the reordering had stopped when the impression would be visible. I asked who had access. Annabelle, of course, plus the owner. Mrs. Creeley dusted the surfaces. She didn't play with mail. Annabelle Lewis herself came in with a notepad and the posture of a woman who had made up her mind never to apologize for anything again. She was mid-30s, neat, and her eyes ran audits on people before she spoke to them. Tell me how you set the places, I said. I wrote them as Mrs. Renshaw dictated, she said. Then I placed them. 5 minutes later, Mr. Carbone called me to the kitchen to answer whether we needed a 6th setting. A Mr. Dell had phoned and might come. He didn't, as it turned out. When I returned, Mrs. Creeley had begun pouring water. We sat. Anyone handle the cards between your placing and seating? No, she said, unless the wind learned to read. That would be convenient, I told her. What pen did you use? She looked blank. Pen. For the cards. Mrs. Renshaw used her own, she said, quick. That matched the claim, but the quickness said the subject had been discussed, maybe aloud, maybe alone. I noted her pen anyway, a brown ink pelican with a nib that had kissed paper a lot. Mrs. R's pen was a black ink Waterman she kept at the desk. The cards showed black ink. All right. Ludo Carbone, when summoned, came in with the air of a man who expects applause and is prepared to offer it himself if the audience is shy. He confirmed the courses and the service. He rolled his eyes at the fork question. A fork goes where it goes, he said. If it left on feet and shoes. I'm in my kitchen. You went into the dining room before lunch, I said, to complain about flowers. I observed them, he said. They were orange when they should have been white. I made a face. That is not a crime in this country. It depends on the face, I told him. Did you touch the sideboard? He threw up his hands. I lean. You cook, you lean. I leaned on the cigarette case, I asked. Is there a law against cases now? He demanded, and I let him go. We rounded it with the safe. It lived in the bedroom closet and wore a tasteful coat of steel. Mrs. Renshaw spun the dial and opened it with a muscle memory that said she had done it more than once. Inside, a man could have lived cheaply for a year. I didn't touch anything except the envelope with the codicil. The flap had been resealed. I could feel the ridge and see the feathering where the gum had re-wet. There was a faint, sweet note that didn't belong to old stationery. Not steam. Glue stick, the kind a schoolchild would use. Whoever had done it hadn't wanted to bring kettles into a bedroom or leave rings on a dressing table. On the envelope's face, the note Codicil August had been written and then gone over again, the second pass heavier. The overline stopped short of the first on the C. That could be nerves or an imitation. "Who else knows the combination?" I asked. "No one," she said. "Who watches you dial?" "No one," she said, and meant it. But there are mirrors in bedrooms. I called Wolfe from the little sitting room across the hall. He lifted at once, which meant his fork had arrived, and order had been restored enough for him to consider disorder elsewhere. I gave him the count. The missing dinner fork confirmed. The tablecloth telling nothing except the obvious. The seating cards with indented ghosts. The mantle's lemon tang. The desk sorted only where a visitor would see. The safe's envelope showing kindergarten chemistry. "Pfui," he said, which in Wolfe is interest dressed as contempt. "A person with access and patience. The fork at Yarrow's place is a signal, not an accident." "To him?" I asked. "Or about him?" "Either. We will learn which," he said. "You will do 2 things. 1. Obtain samples of handwriting from Miss Lewis, Mr. Yarrow, and Mr. Victor. Notes, signatures, anything casual. 2. Arrange to be present tomorrow at noon in the dining room with the staff circulating. You will set the table yourself, 5 places, and you will mark a fork. Lightly score the neck with your penknife. If it disappears again, we'll know our Harrier is both persistent and fond of emblems. And if it doesn't, then we will provoke another emblem," he said. "It will not require much. When the sanctity of a house is the target, temptation increases with opportunity." I hung up and turned to find Annabelle at the doorway, watching me as if she could rearrange me by date. She had a paper in her hand. "For tomorrow," she said. "The foundation meeting was moved up. Mr. Yarrow will drop by at 11 with the figures. Victor said he may come after. Mrs. Renshaw will be here." "Good," I said. "Tell Mr. Carbone to plan a lunch that annoys no one." "That's not a cuisine," she said. "Then cook it anyway," I told her, and pocketed the envelope of cards as if it were more dangerous than a gun. The next morning I arrived at the Renshaw townhouse with the kind of punctuality that makes doormen reconsider their gossip. Mrs. Creeley met me with the stiffness of a woman who had decided I was either an inspector of linens or an unnecessary complication. I let her lead me to the dining room, where the table was still bare, and told her I'd be handling the setting. She sniffed but fetched the silver chest. I unpacked 5 dinner forks, lined them like recruits, and, using my pocket knife, put a small nick on the neck of one. It was the kind of mark that would disappear under polish, but for now was plain enough to me. I placed it at the seat that had been Yarrow's yesterday. The rest went out in order. Knife, fork, spoon, napkin. The layout would have satisfied Fritz himself, if not Wolfe. Annabelle drifted in to check on the preparations. She carried her notebook like a shield. "We expect Mr. Yarrow around 11, she said. "Mrs. Renshaw will be down at noon. Victor may come. Mr. Carbone will be ready with a cold platter." She looked at me. "You're setting the table?" "That's right," I said. She hesitated just long enough to make it awkward, then nodded and wrote something in the notebook. Whether it was "Goodwin can set forks" or "Watch this man," I couldn't say. At 11 sharp, Yarrow arrived with a portfolio tucked under his arm and the pinched look of a man who thought time was best spent elsewhere. I let him into the dining room, where he immediately spread papers across the polished wood, ignoring the fact that a set table was in the making. "Figures for the foundation," he said, as if I had asked. "Sure," I told him. "If you spill ink on the napkins, I'll bill you for dry cleaning." He didn't smile. He leaned over his columns and muttered, "Pen scratching." His hand was quick and nervous, which matched the sample Wolfe had asked for. I took careful note of his signature when he closed a report. The capital Y had a flourish that could have signed a treaty. Victor Renshaw came 20 minutes later, smelling faintly of cologne and impatience. He was tall, expensively put together, and his handshake was the kind that ends before it begins. He looked at the table. "What's this, lunch theatre?" "Call it rehearsal," I said. "Archie Goodwin," he said, remembering my name like it was an address he didn't want. "My stepmother has a taste for melodrama. I assume you're her director?" "Something like that," I said. "Take a seat. Victor. Papers later." He didn't sit, but he stayed, watching Yarrow with the kind of focus you reserve for rivals. Annabelle came back in to announce that Mrs. Renshaw would join us shortly. Ludo Carbone pushed through from the kitchen with a tray of sliced meats, set it down with a thump, and demanded to know who had ordered radishes. "They insult the beef," he said, and stalked out again. The five of us, minus Mrs. Renshaw, stood around the table like figures in a waxwork, pretending the cutlery didn't matter. My eyes stayed on the fork at Yarrow's place. It gleamed, nick intact. At 12, Mrs. Renshaw entered, composed but tight around the eyes. She nodded to each of us and took her seat at the head. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it's inconvenient. But I want to see with my own eyes that nothing is amiss." We sat. Annabelle placed water glasses. Yarrow shuffled his papers to the side. Victor drummed his fingers on the table. I kept my gaze casual, letting it slide over the silver as if I had no interest. The plates arrived, laid by Creeley with the efficiency of a drill sergeant. Knives, spoons, forks, all present, even Yarrow's. The nick glinted up at me like a secret handshake. Lunch began, but the conversation wasn't built to last. Yarrow and Victor sparred over numbers. Annabelle tried to interject but was brushed aside. Mrs. Renshaw ate little and watched everything. I pretended to enjoy the beef. Then, in the middle of Yarrow's explanation of a deficit column, Annabelle dropped her pen. She ducked under the table to retrieve it. Her head stayed down a beat too long. When she resurfaced, she smiled apologetically and made a note. I let my gaze return to Yarrow's fork. Gone. The plate sat bare, knife resting lonely, spoon to its right, but the fork had vanished as if it had never been there. I didn't blink. Mrs. Renshaw gasped softly. "Again," she whispered. Victor turned. "What?" He saw it too. "This is absurd." Yarrow looked at his place, then at me. "I didn't touch it." "Of course you didn't," I said evenly, "but it walked all the same." Annabelle's eyes were on me, not the fork. She was waiting to see what I would do, as if I were part of the trick. Ludo came in then with a second tray and frowned at the tension. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Hold it," I said. "Nobody leaves this table until I say so." I reached under the tablecloth, searching the floor. Nothing. I checked the napkin, the plate edge, even the fold of Yarrow's jacket. The fork wasn't hiding. It was gone, spirited. Mrs. Renshaw's hand trembled on her glass. "It's deliberate," she said. "They want me to see." I let the silence stretch. Then I folded my napkin and got up. "Stay put," I said. I walked to the sideboard, opened the silver chest. 7 dinner forks. No addition, no stray. Our marked soldier had vanished into thin air. I stepped back and looked at the group. Yarrow was pale and defensive. Victor angry, Annabelle composed but too composed, Mrs. Renshaw rattled, and Ludo muttering in Italian about lunatics. That was the circle. "All right," I said. "Here's how it stands. Either one of you pulled that fork while the rest of us blinked, or someone has access to this room who isn't seated here. And since I watched the doors, my money's on one of you Yarrow shot up. I will not be accused of theft over cutlery." "Sit down," I said. "You're not accused." "Yet, but we've got a pattern. The mantel, the desk, the safe, and now the fork. Whoever's doing this wants Mrs. Renshaw unsettled, not robbed. They want her looking over her shoulder. That makes it personal. Victor leaned back, arms crossed. Maybe she unsettles herself. A plate without a fork. It's laughable. Laugh all you want, I told him, but somebody just made a fork disappear under 5 sets of eyes. That's not nerves. That's skill or planning. Mrs. Renshaw stood, fragile but firm. Mr. Goodwin, I want you to tell Mr. Wolfe exactly what you saw. That's the plan, I said. I collected the seating cards and tucked them away again. Yarrow muttered that he was leaving, but I blocked him until I was ready. When the luncheon finally broke, I walked out with the same calm I'd walked in with, but my pocket held notes Wolfe would enjoy, because if he liked emblems, this one had just screamed at us. Back at the brownstone, I found him in the office, orchids breathing their perfume above him. I laid out the report. The setup, the nicked fork, the vanishing act. His eyes stayed shut through most of it, opening only when I described Annabelle's pen trick under the table. "Pfui," he said at last. "A fork again. Twice his insistence, and the locus is Calvin Yarrow." He folded his hands. "Archie, tomorrow you will invite them all here. The brownstone has been disturbed already. Let us allow the trespasser to play their game in our house. Then we shall see who holds the fork." If inviting trouble into the brownstone were a sacrament, Wolfe would have hired a priest to object. As it was, he hired me. I made the calls. Mrs. Renshaw accepted in a tone that said she'd dress her nerves in pearls. Yarrow griped about time and the dignity of treasurers, but said yes. Victor said he had 15 minutes and used 6 of them telling me about it. Annabelle said she'd bring the latest agenda and the kind of pen that never blots. Ludo asked if he could cook. I told him no, and he took it like an insult to Italy. Wolfe rang for Fritz and dictated a menu that wouldn't scorch tempers. Tea, small sandwiches, tarts. He added, "Use the silver pastry forks," and let his eyes rest on me. It wasn't a look. It was an assignment. I went to the pantry, opened the velvet-lined drawer, and found the set. 12 small forks, the kind people think were invented for women until they see Wolfe eat. Strawberries in June. I lifted one and, with my penknife, gave the neck a shy little nick. It wouldn't show in lamplight unless you were looking for it. I put that fork at the place to Wolfe's right, where a guest would sit if Wolfe meant to watch him without turning his head. While Fritz brewed and muttered and laid napkins like creeds, I phoned Saul Panzer. If you don't know Saul, I'm not introducing you. Men like Saul are best discovered by accident, across a chessboard or a stakeout. I gave him the capsule, glue stick, seating cards, lemon oil, a safe that had felt fingers on the flap. "Watch Lewis," I said. "Start with stationers between 73rd and 76th. Glue sticks, place cards, Waterman cartridges. See who smiles at her name. Then Victor. If he sees money as a hobby, find the part that pinches him. And if Yarrow has a private door into anybody's decisions, I want a photograph of the key." "Got it," Saul said. "I'll call if I net a fish." He didn't waste syllables, which is one of the reasons I pay attention when he uses any. By 3 the office was set. Wolfe sat, the orchids hanging their perfumes like favors no one is good enough to wear. The desk was clear except for a blotter, a letter opener, bronze, shaped like a leaf, and the bell cord. Wolfe had placed the opener at a precise angle. He had once told me that the line from the pen, rest to the corner, should mirror the line of the desk's edge. I had laughed and then stopped when he gave me a list of reasons why. That angle was bait. If a hand moved it, it would not be by accident. They came in the order I would have picked if I wanted sparks without flame. Annabelle first, cool and exact in navy, and a small pin that meant something to a person who reads minutes for pleasure. She took the red leather chair, crossed her ankles, and put the agenda where a man could read it without touching. Yarrow next, with a briefcase and a face that said he counted paperclips for recreation. He looked at the orchids the way a man looks at money he can't spend. Victor arrived a few minutes late, his apology painted on and drying fast. Mrs. Renshaw last, dignity buttoned up to the collar, eyes searching the room as if she could tell which square was safe to stand on. Wolfe did not get up. He said their names like he was issuing passports and gestured them into chairs. Fritz came with the tray, a procession of white cups, lemon, sugar, sandwiches in neat triangles, and the silver pastry forks, one at each place, as ordered. He set them and went out. On his way he glanced at me. If a man can nod with his eyebrows, he did. I took my stand by the Globe Bar. Wolfe let the room ripen. It's something he does. Silence like a net. When he judged the fish had stopped bumping into the ropes, he said, "You are here because someone has chosen to demonstrate mastery in a house that is not his. He will try to do it again." I proposed to relieve him of the itch. Victor made a sound you could call a laugh if you were short of vocabulary. "So we're here to watch silverware," he said. "You are here," Wolfe said, "to be watched." He turned his head an inch. "Mr. Goodwin." "Right," I said. "Here's the sport." In Mrs. Renshaw's house, a fork vanished twice, once before service, once under noses. Also, documents breathed when they shouldn't, and a mantle learned to walk. Whoever's doing it isn't stealing wealth. He's stealing calm. Today we see whether the itch travels. I poured tea for Mrs. Renshaw because I still believe in civilization, then for the others. When I set Yarrow's saucer down, my knuckles brushed the tines of the nicked fork. I took my hand away and watched the way a cat watches a mouse pretend not to be a mouse. Annabel uncapped her pen and set it to the agenda. Yarrow, because he was Yarrow, shuffled figures he hadn't been invited to shuffle. Victor inspected the room and found nothing he liked. Mrs. Renshaw held her cup like a song she was afraid to sing. Wolfe inquired, mildly, whether the Foundation's bylaws required the treasurer to approve sales of donor property. Yarrow said no, but his expression said yes. It helps. Wolfe asked Annabel how many times in the last month she had been asked to tidy a desk that did not belong to her. Annabel said once, by Mrs. Renshaw, and if her pulse quickened, you couldn't see it at the throat. He asked Victor whether he had debts. Victor said with brightness that only men without vision had debts. Men with vision had leverage. "Phooey," Wolfe said, and reached for a sandwich. Annabel's pen rolled an inch. She caught it, made a notation, then let the pen slip again, and, with the apology of a woman who has learned how to ask forgiveness for existing, bent to retrieve it. Under the table she stayed a half beat too long. I did not move. I did not breathe. When she came up, she smiled at me. For my part, I looked at the saucer at Wolfe's right. No fork. Mrs. Renshaw saw my eyes and followed them. Her cup clinked the saucer. Victor's mouth twisted. Yarrow went white and then red, a traffic signal with legs. Annabel's smile did not change. Wolfe did not glance down. He knew. "Fritz," he said, not loudly. Fritz came as if he had been behind the panel the entire time. Wolfe said, "Lock the front and kitchen doors, please." No one leaves. It wasn't drama. It was policy. The doors clicked in the hall like a gavel tapping wood. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. I moved. First the carpet under the table, smooth and clean, no gleam of silver. Then the folds of the tablecloth, then Yarrow's cuff with a polite request and a look. Nothing. Annabel's lap, respectful distance, no fork. Victor's trouser leg, clear. Mrs. Renshaw's napkin, folded and innocent. I went to the tray, lifted the domed cover where Fritz had put the sweets to keep them honest. No fork. "Gentlemen and Miss Lewis," Wolfe said, "you will be patient for 1 minute." He leaned an inch, rang the bell cord once, and folded his hands again. If serenity could strangle a man, the room would have lost 3. Fritz returned with a small wooden box I hadn't ordered, a humble thing from the kitchen. He set it on the desk. Wolfe looked at it as if it had invented the wheel. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "the drawer to my right." I pulled it. Inside was the bronze letter opener, angled just so. Also a space as wide as a fork, in velvet I hadn't seen before. Wolfe never keeps silver in his desk. He looked at the angle, then at me. The opener had shifted half a degree. To anyone else, a sneeze. To Wolfe, a rifle shot. I shut the drawer and let the half-degree live in the air. If the fork had slid into a pocket, it had found a pocket with no fear in it. That was the point. It wasn't theft. It was handwriting. The phone on Wolfe's desk sounded once. I lifted. Saul. Stationer on 74th remembers a woman buying a packet of heavy place cards and a glue stick day before yesterday, he said. Says she was neat, brown hair, carried a leather folio. Also, your Mr. Victor had a conversation at a bank that ended with him not smiling. Want more? Later, I said, and put the receiver down. Wolfe opened his eyes a shade. Thank you, Mr. Panzer, he murmured, though he could not have heard him. Then to the room. You are all being insulted, he said. As am I. A man's house is his integrity made furniture. If mine can be trifled with in my presence, we are past trifles. Mr. Goodwin, you will call Mr. Kramer and ask him to be at his leisure an hour from now. Meanwhile, we shall have conversation. I resumed my post and felt the brownstone settle around us, not as a shield, but as a lens. Whoever had used a fork as a signature had just signed his name in Nero Wolfe's office. That was not going to fade with a little polish. The silence after Wolfe's declaration could have fertilized orchids. Everyone in that room sat like they'd just realized they'd walked into a trap they hadn't noticed being set. That was the trick with Wolfe. He didn't spring a snare. He let people feel it tighten by itself. Victor was the first to speak, which made sense. He was the sort who always needed his voice in the air or he'd suffocate. This is outrageous, he said. You've locked us in a house like criminals over a fork. It is not the fork, Wolfe said, his voice so quiet you had to lean toward it. It is the trespass. The deliberate displacement of objects is an assertion of mastery, and here in my house, it is an affront. Victor scoffed. Then call the police and be done with it. I will, Wolfe replied, but not until I have clarified the insult. That sat like a stone in the middle of the room. Yarrow fidgeted with his papers as if numbers might shield him. Annabel kept her pen poised but idle, her eyes a little too calm. Mrs. Renshaw clasped her hands on her lap as if she were holding herself together with fingers alone. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Yarrow. You, sir? You were the locus of the first emblem. A place set for you was deprived of a fork. You were the seat of the second absence. Here, too, the emblem vanished beside you. Why? Yarrow's lips pressed thin. You can't think I would do something so idiotic to myself. If I had any interest in unsettling Eleanor, I wouldn't choose a trick that makes me the fool. Perhaps, Wolfe said. Or perhaps your position is one in which both guilt and innocence produce gain. An enemy unsettles you to weaken you, or you unsettle yourself to create the appearance of enmity. You are a treasurer. You understand profit both ways. Yarrow flushed. This is ridiculous. Not yet, Wolfe murmured. It will be. He turned those half-lidded eyes to Annabel. Miss Lewis, you have been involved in the mechanics. You wrote the names. You placed the cards. At both meals you contrived to lose your pen beneath the table. In my office you did so again, with the same gesture, the same pause. Why? Annabel's smile was brief, polite. I drop things, Mr. Wolfe. Pens, mostly. They roll, and you pick them up, mostly. They roll with punctuality, Wolfe said. I do not believe in punctual accidents. Her face remained smooth, but her knuckles tightened on the pen. Victor, Wolfe said, turning again. Your debts. Victor leaned forward, his tone edged. I told you, I don't have debts. I have leverage. My stepmother sits in that townhouse like a spider in silk, holding assets that could double in value if sold. I don't need to unsettle her with childish pranks. I can make a case in court if it comes to that. Mrs. Renshaw's voice cracked through the air like porcelain breaking. And I told you, Victor, you will not take my house. Not while I live. Then perhaps, Wolfe said, you are being urged to feel your house is no longer your own. To push you into retreat. Who profits from that, Mr. Goodwin? Depends, I said from my post. Victor profits if she sells. Yarrow profits if she changes her will to favor the foundation. Annabelle profits if her loyalty cashes in as an inheritance or a salary rise. Ludo, well, he profits if the kitchen budget doubles, but he's not in the room, so we'll leave him with his radishes. Wolfe shut his eyes briefly. We cannot leave him. We cannot leave anyone. He opened them again and let the silence breathe. Then he said, Mr. Goodwin, where is the fork? I shrugged. Not in a pocket I checked. Not on the floor. Not in the tray. Not in the desk. It is here, Wolfe said. I guarantee it. When a trespass is performed for emblem, it must be discovered to have meaning. Mr. Goodwin, search again. I obeyed. This time I checked not only the obvious. I moved the cushions on the red leather chair. I ran a hand along the seams of the curtains. I opened the globe bar. Nothing. When I turned back, Wolfe gave me the smallest flick of a finger. The orchids. I crossed, bent, and parted the leaves, and there it was, balanced across the lip of a terracotta pot, my nicked pastry fork, shining smug in the shadow of blossoms. I plucked it free and held it up. Mrs. Renshaw gasped, Victor swore, Yarrow sagged, Annabelle didn't move. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That, he said, is artistry. Not to deprive, but to display. A trespasser who hides is a coward. A trespasser who decorates is a poet. We are dealing with the latter, Victor snorted. You're making a sonnet out of flatware. No, Wolfe said, I am making a pattern. And the pattern speaks. He pressed his fingertips together. Who among you would risk placing silver in my orchids, in this room, under my eye? Not an outsider, not a coward. Someone who craves not victory, but demonstration. Someone confident enough to believe she, or he, could outwit even Nero Wolfe. Annabelle finally spoke, her tone steady. And you've already decided who, I suppose? Not decided, Wolfe said, but deduced. The person who moved the cigarette case and resealed an envelope with glue. The person who knows the order of letters on a desk. The person who has opportunity and the nerve to exploit it. The person who performs her trespasses not for gain, but for the satisfaction of rearrangement. Miss Lewis, you are a secretary. You live by order, but you have begun to indulge in disorder as your private sport. And in doing so, you have made yourself both obvious and contemptible. Her face barely changed, but there was the faintest rise at the corner of her mouth. You think I've been tormenting Eleanor for amusement? Not amusement, Wolfe said. Ambition. You want her to lean on you, to see the world shifting around her and cling to the one who keeps the minutes steady. You wish to make yourself indispensable. And you have nearly succeeded. Mrs. Renshaw whispered. Annabelle. No. Annabelle looked at her employer, and for the first time her mask slipped. Eleanor, you've no idea how easily men take advantage of you. Victor with his lawsuits, Yarrow with his accounts, they circle you. If I unsettle you, it is so you will turn to me. Only me. I'm the one who can keep the chaos straight. Yarrow surged to his feet. She's insane. Sit down, I told him, and he did. more from the weight of Wolfe's silence than mine. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. There it is. She has confessed, not by admission, but by motive. Her trespasses were never thefts. They were demonstrations. She wished to be guardian by being the only one who could restore order. Pfui! It is petty and cruel. Annabel's knuckles whitened around her pen. You can't prove anything. No, Wolfe asked softly. Mr. Goodwin. I held up the fork, nick visible. Proof enough, Miss Lewis. You put it in the orchids during your little pen dive, and if Sergeant Kramer doesn't call that proof, he'll still call it obstruction, trespass, and whatever else fits his vocabulary today. Annabel didn't flinch, but her eyes hardened. You think you've won? Wolfe closed his eyes. No, Miss Lewis. I think you've lost. My house is inviolate. You have made it otherwise. That will not be tolerated. The fork lay heavy in my hand. In that room, with the orchids breathing and the air tight as a drum, we all knew the trespassers had reached their end. Wolfe had taken back the sanctity, and Annabel Lewis had just written her name in silver where no one could erase it. Kramer arrived with the smell of a cigar he wasn't smoking and the disposition of a man who'd been promised steak and handed oatmeal. I opened the door and he grunted at me like we'd been feuding over a parking spot for 20 years, which we have. In the office, he took in the lineup: Renshaw brittle, Victor glossy, Yarrow tight, Annabel composed, Wolfe immovable, and set his hat on his knee like it had evidence on it. What's the emergency, Wolfe? A spoon laughed at you, he said. A fork, Wolfe told him. 3 times. Twice in Mrs. Renshaw's house, once in mine. It did not laugh. It declared, Mr. Goodwin. I held up the pastry fork, showing the nick, and gave him the sequence. Kramer listened without interrupting, which is not his hobby. When I got to the part where I plucked silver out of a pot under Wolfe's orchids, he made a face like something had used his badge for a coaster. So we got a parlor trick, he said. Who am I supposed to pinch? The cook? He had the nerve to look me in the eye once. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow a millimeter. You will wait, he said. This is not larceny for profit. It is harassment for position. But there is more. Mr. Goodwin will now take Mrs. Renshaw to her lawyer to compare a codicil. If I am right, what began as emblem has escalated to attempted fraud. That put Kramer's head around. He liked fraud. He could spell it in court. What codicil? Her will, Wolfe said. Handled by a Mr. Dell. I expect to learn that the copy in her safe has been resealed and altered to advantage someone who has been circling her. We will have names soon enough. Kramer's gaze skated to Annabel, to Yarrow, to Victor, back to Wolfe. Don't try to hand me inference on a plate, Wolfe. I need facts, he said, but his voice had shifted 2 degrees toward interest. You shall have them, Wolfe replied. Mr. Goodwin. I got my hat. Mrs. Renshaw rose like a woman going to a doctor. Kramer wagged a forefinger at me on our way out. Bring back something that doesn't smell like orchids, he said. Mr. Dell had an office that had known mahogany when mahogany was a religion. He was the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste adjectives. He put his glasses on, offered a hand to Mrs. Renshaw that carried more steadiness than sympathy, and heard my reason for barging. When I got to resealed envelope, his mouth flattened. I retained an executed original, initialed by Mrs. Renshaw on each page, he said. She took a counterpart for her safe. If there's irregularity, I will be annoyed. Get in line, I told him. He fetched a file and placed it on the blotter, turning pages with the care of a man who has seen paper ruin lives. On his copy, each page had, in the bottom right, ER in a tidy hand. The dispositive clause transferred the art collection to the foundation and required disposal by the Board of Trustees in accordance with written policy. Proceeds to designated programs. No individual discretion. Clean enough to eat off. We returned to the townhouse, where Annabel met us at the door with the efficiency of a dam opposing water. I asked for the safe. She hesitated a half-beat, looked to Mrs. Renshaw, then stood aside. The envelope felt freshly obedient. Inside, the codicil's language wore the same suit, but had a new tie, a sentence tucked into the operative paragraph. With authority delegated to the treasurer for disposition at his discretion as necessary to meet market conditions, Dell's glasses came off like a curtain. "That language is not mine," he said, "nor is the absence of initials on the last page. This is not the document I prepared." "I suppose the glue stick wasn't yours either," I said. Annabel kept her tone neutral. "If something untoward has occurred, we should inform the board immediately." "We'll inform the police," Dell snapped, discovering a temper under his flannel. I watched Mrs. Renshaw absorb it. Shock didn't suit her. Resolve did. "Mr. Dell," she said, calm and lower, "we will re-execute today. And we will keep this incident quiet until Mr. Wolfe advises." "I am not handing my house to rumor." Dell inclined his head. "Very well." He repacked his copy as a priest might close a reliquary and left us with the counterfeit, which had the decency to look inexpensive. I phoned Wolfe from the hall. "You were right," I said. "Foundation in, treasurer empowered. Last page missing initials on the safe copy. Dell's is clean. Glue stick fingerprints as yet theoretical. Phooey to glue," he said. "Our trespasser has a mind like a ledger, all columns and control. If she cannot own, she will arrange. You will bring the safe copy here. You will ask Mr. Dell to join us at 6. Mr. Kramer is already apprised and boiling. And Archie, note Mr. Yarrow's face when he hears that clause. It will speak." I turned and found Yarrow already in the doorway, because news in houses like this moves faster than phones. Annabel had summoned him by magic or messenger. Either way, he didn't wait to be offered a chair. "That codicil is invalid," he said too quickly. "Delegating discretion to a treasurer is improper. Eleanor, you shouldn't have—" "I didn't," she said. He backed a step, recalibrating outrage. "Then someone is framing me." "Possibly," I said. "If so, they did you the favor of writing your job title into a will." He swallowed and turned the color of chalk. My duties—" He stopped, which was wise. Victor came in on the tail of that and saw the three of us around the paper. "Ah," he said, bright. "The famous document. Does it at least name anyone who isn't in this room?" "It names a treasurer," I told him. He smiled at Yarrow without his teeth. "Well, markets do what markets do." "That will do," Mrs. Renshaw said, and for once both men closed their mouths like drawers. On our way out, I paused in the foyer with Annabel. "Stationer on 74th remembers a woman bought place cards and a glue stick 2 days ago," I said quietly. "Brown hair, leather folio. Neat. I buy supplies," she said. "That's my job." "Sure," I said. "Buying accessories for altered codicils isn't." Her lips thinned. "You only think you know who's dangerous in this house." "Lady," I said, "today a piece of paper tried to be more dangerous than you." It still needed a hand. Back at the brownstone, the air had cleared the way it does when the storm decides to take a breath. Wolfe listened as I gave it to him in order. Dell's clean copy, the safe's doctored clause, Yarrow's blanch, Annabel's mask not cracking because it didn't need to. He made a small sound that meant satisfaction had brushed his sleeve. "Excellent," he said. "We will now compress. Mr. Kramer will come at 6. Mr. Dell will attend. You will fetch Saul. Mr. Panzer will sit in the front room with a camera and ears. At 6:10, I will inform our company that the altered codicil is evidence of attempted fraud. The person responsible will object in a particular tone. I will then ask a question whose answer she cannot give." "Which question?" I asked. "The one about mirrors," he said, and let me stew. Saul called just before 6. Your Victor's leverage has teeth, he said. Margin calls. He needs cash or a miracle. Also, Yarrow had a friendly coffee with a fellow from Wexford and Green, auctioneers who like foundations. They talked consignments. And Annabel? I asked. Bought 2 glue sticks, he said. She's thorough. Meet me at the brownstone, I said. Bring the appetite of a man who enjoys other people's mistakes. At 6, the office was full again, like the end of a bad play where the cast comes out to bow and the audience argues about the villain. Dell stood by the desk, jaw set. Kramer took the red chair like a king on loan. Yarrow perspired. Victor postured. Annabel wrote a date on the top of the agenda, because a woman like that puts a date on everything. Wolfe opened his eyes. You have tried to move a house by moving its order, he said into the room at large. You have progressed from emblem to forgery. That was foolish. It made you visible. He raised a finger the way a conductor does. Mr. Goodwin, the mirror. I brought the standing mirror from the corner and set it near the desk, angled so the surface reflected the door to the hall and the front edge of the safe copy on the blotter. Wolfe nodded once. Miss Lewis, he said, how did you learn the combination to Mrs. Renshaw's safe? Her pen poised. I didn't. You did, Wolfe said. You learned it by watching, by using the habit of a woman who glances at herself while she works. Mrs. Renshaw, when you open your safe, you face your dressing mirror. You're precise. You center the dial. Your mouth repeats numbers under your breath. In the glass, reversed, a patient eye could memorize. It was clever. But once you were done, you resealed with a glue that left a sweet trace and substituted a page that omitted initials. You cannot imitate what you do not respect. That is your failure. Order, not affection. Annabel stared at the mirror. If she had been holding the fork, she would have stabbed the glass. You can't prove? Kramer stood. Lady, I don't need Wolfe to prove your method to know I want your hands for prints and your pen for ink, he said. And if that codicil points at a treasurer, we'll be knocking on his door hard enough to wake him. By all means, Wolfe said serenely. But first, he added, looking past them all with that calm that makes brave men itch, we will have one more demonstration. Mr. Goodwin, invite everyone to return here tomorrow at noon. We will tidy this to conclusion. The house that has been disturbed will be made whole. The next morning, the brownstone felt like a stage that knew its play was about to close. Fritz was sour because he had to polish silver that had been manhandled like dice, and Wolfe was more silent than usual, which is like saying the Atlantic was a bit damp. He sat with his lips pressed tight, eyes half shut, palms together in his lap, not a picture of serenity, but of waiting. He doesn't like being forced to share his office with outsiders, but he tolerates it the way a man tolerates surgery. Necessary, unpleasant, and only done once if possible. At 11, I called the roll. Mrs. Renshaw was punctual, nerves dressed in a blue suit. Yarrow arrived with papers again, as though arithmetic could protect him. Victor came in looking fresh from a barber's chair, confidence sprayed on like cologne. Annabel entered last, neat as ever, her folio clutched like scripture. Dell joined them, jaw tight, while Kramer parked himself with his cigar stubbed out early, a signal that he meant business. Saul Panzer waited in the front room with a camera on his lap and patience on his face. Wolfe didn't speak until the clock struck noon. Then he opened his eyes and let them move over the room one at a time. We are here, he said, to conclude what has been attempted. A woman's house was unsettled. Objects moved, order disfigured. The intent was to weaken her standing, to suggest her possessions were vulnerable and her decisions compromised. It escalated to the alteration of a legal document. That is no longer emblematic mischief. That is fraud. Victor shifted in his chair. You can say it all day, Wolfe, but you still don't have evidence that points at me. You? Wolfe asked, eyelids heavy. I did not name you. Victor flushed, which was as good as a confession to a man like Wolfe. Yarrow cleared his throat. If anyone forged a clause about the treasurer, they were trying to frame me. Indeed, Wolfe said. But why frame you, Mr. Yarrow, unless you had the position to benefit? And why trust that forgery would survive scrutiny unless the framer assumed your cooperation or your panic? Either way, you're not blameless, Yarrow sputtered. Dell broke in sharply. The forgery was crude. A glue stick, an omitted initial, hardly the work of a seasoned criminal. It was opportunism, not strategy. Annabel spoke then, soft but firm. You're all determined to make this about me. I admit I bought supplies. I admit I handled cards. But do you truly believe I'd risk my livelihood and my position for such theatrics? You already did, Wolfe said. In Mrs. Renshaw's dining room, twice, and here, in my office, beneath my orchids. You cannot help yourself. To create disorder you alone can correct. That is your vanity. But the codicil proves more. It was not merely a prank. It was aimed, Mrs. Renshaw stirred. At whom? At you, Wolfe said, but through Yarrow. The clause, had it stood, gave him discretion to dispose of your collection. Imagine, in a year, paintings consigned, sculptures auctioned, proceeds routed under the Foundation's flag, yet under one man's hand. That would make him powerful. Too powerful for others circling this house. Victor leaned forward. So you're saying Annabel tried to give Yarrow power he didn't want? That makes no sense. Correction, Wolfe said. She gave the appearance of giving him power, knowing it would collapse under inspection and leave him disgraced. Who profits then? Not Yarrow, not you. Only the person who becomes the one indispensable support to Mrs. Renshaw when her advisers are exposed as untrustworthy. Miss Lewis's strategy was not theft, but substitution. Replace trust with herself. Kramer slapped his knee. That's enough for me. If she swapped a page in a will, that's forgery, intent or no. We'll book her and let a judge chew it. Annabel's composure cracked then. She turned on Mrs. Renshaw. Eleanor, don't let them. You know what Victor wants. To sell you out of your house. You know Yarrow dreams of auctions. I was the one steady hand. I kept your desk, your letters, your minutes. I only meant to keep you safe. Mrs. Renshaw's eyes filled, but she shook her head. By making me think my home was haunted? By pulling forks from under my nose? That is not safety, Annabel. That is cruelty. Annabel's lips tightened. Better cruelty than betrayal. That will do, Wolfe said, voice final. Mr. Kramer, you have your trespasser. The evidence is the doctored codicil, the glue trace, the indented cards, the vanished forks, and her own confession of motive. Take her. Kramer stood, signaling two uniforms waiting outside. They came in, efficient, respectful, and placed hands on Annabel's arms. She didn't fight. She only looked at Mrs. Renshaw once more, a look full of hurt pride rather than apology. Then she was gone, footsteps echoing through the hall like punctuation. The office breathed easier, though not happily. Yarrow sagged in his chair. Victor straightened as if dusting suspicion off his suit. Mrs. Renshaw sat very still. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz. Beer. While Fritz poured, Dell spoke. It seems my client is safe, but not unscarred. She has been surrounded by those who seek advantage. Mr. Wolfe, your conclusion is efficient. It is inevitable, Wolfe said. A house disturbed must be restored. Victor smirked. And what about me? You still think I wanted her property? You still do, Wolfe said. But now you're checked. Mrs. Renshaw will not doubt you again without cause. I suggest you consider that your gain is postponed, not lost. Mr. Yarrow. He gave a thin smile. Your figures will be watched with more care. You may find that a nuisance. Endure it, Yarrow muttered. I will. Though it didn't sound like gratitude. Fritz set a glass before Wolfe, who took it and sipped. Mr. Goodwin, accompany Mrs. Renshaw home. See that her house is unmolested, and remind her that order is not fragile. It is enforced. I helped her with her coat in the hall. She touched my arm. Mr. Goodwin, I feel foolish. All this over Fawkes. No, I said. Over power. The Fawkes were just handwriting. Wolfe can read any script when she left. The brownstone felt like itself again. Silence returned to the office, heavy and whole. Wolfe drained his glass, leaned back, and let his eyes shut. The world, he said, is filled with those who covet control more than wealth. It is their folly that they believe disorder is strength. Pfui! I grinned. Well, at least you got your fork back. He didn't open his eyes. Archie. Bring me a plate, so I did. And this time, the fork was right where it belonged. Kramer didn't take a bow on his way out, but he left the air different. You could feel the brownstone recognize itself again, like the room had been holding its breath and decided to try oxygen. Fritz reclaimed the tray with a dignity that let you know pastry forks would not be discussed in his presence for a week. Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes, and let the chair does its work. When Wolfe closes his lids after a tussle, it isn't sleep. It's a private inventory. What's settled, what's owed, what's for dinner. The phone went twice before I could cross the rug. It was Kramer, and he didn't bother with insults. We searched the Lewis apartment, he said. Bathroom cabinet had 2 glue sticks. Stationer on 74th ID's her. We also found a cloth roll tucked in a sewing basket. 2 dinner forks, same pattern as Renshaw's set. You want to guess how I feel about that? Like a man who can charge burglary for souvenirs, I said. He grunted. Trespass, tampering, attempted fraud is plenty. We'll float the rest past the DA Wolfe there. He's recuperating from an assault on his orchids, I said. He sends his affection. Tell him I'd rather have a clean case, Kramer said, and hung up before I could tell him he finally had one. I relayed the bulletin. Wolfe's eyes flicked open. Souvenirs, he murmured. Of course. A person who rearranges for emblem will keep a token. Pfui. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Call Mr. Dell. Ask him to bring the proper instrument. Mrs. Renshaw will attend. We will restore in writing what we restored. In fact, Dell arrived with a folder and the look of a man who would enjoy suing a glue manufacturer on principle. Mrs. Renshaw came in quieter than before, as if the floor had taught her something about weight. Wolfe watched while Dell laid out the codicil, and Mrs. Renshaw initialed each page in the bottom right, slow and deliberate, the pen leaving a mark more decisive than a signature. No mirrors this time, just the desk, the lawyer, the client, and Wolfe's orchids nodding approval without forgiving anyone. Additionally, Wolfe said when the last initial dried, you will deposit this counterpart in a bank box and retain only a certified copy at home. Mr. Dell will hold the executed original. The clause concerning your collection will stipulate a vote of the full board, recorded with no single officer's discretion. If your bylaws do not already require 2 signatures on any consignment, amend them. Dell nodded. They will by tomorrow. Good, Wolfe said. Order is not a sentiment. It is a mechanism. She looked at him a long second. I thought order meant things staying where I put them, she said. It seems it means knowing who can move them. That is the base of it, Wolfe agreed. When she left, the door had barely settled when Yarrow appeared in it, with a face like a ledger at a loss. He stood until Wolfe lowered his chin a fraction, which in our court is as good as saying, state your case. I came to resign, Yarrow said, and put his briefcase on the edge of the desk as if he were offering a specimen. From the treasurer's post? Temporarily, until an audit is complete. I didn't tamper with that codicil, but I don't intend to spend the next 6 months answering insinuations Commendable, Wolfe said. You will also recommend that the board engage an external auditor and that all conversations with auction houses be postponed until that review is complete. Your friendly coffee at Wexford and Green was imprudent. Yarrow winced. Panzer? Panzer, I said. He let out a breath he could have invested. Fine. I will draft the memo tonight. His eyes wandered to the orchids and away. I didn't want discretion, Mr. Wolfe. I wanted efficiency. Efficiency without constraint is gluttony, Wolfe said. Good day, Mr. Yarrow. He left 2 inches shorter. The next visitor didn't wait to be announced. Victor slid in like a salesman who knows the house has money and needs to get to the pitch before the spouse comes home. Private word, he said to me, which meant he wanted me out. He wasn't going to get it. Say it, Wolfe told him. Victor glanced at me, decided I was furniture, and leaned in. No one benefits from a public mess. Eleanor will be embarrassed, the foundation will look foolish, and you don't trade in scandal. Talk her into selling quietly. 2 brownstones on her block went last month for numbers that make accountants sing. She doesn't need that mausoleum. I can place it. Your leverage has teeth, Wolfe said, not asking. Your margin calls have reached the howling stage. You want a windfall. Victor smiled without his mouth. If I did, would that make the advice wrong? It would make it contaminated, Wolfe said. You will not hound her. If you do, I will ensure your lenders are acquainted with your appetite. Do not call that a threat. Call it prophylaxis. Victor straightened. The glossy finish cracked. You can't. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, not loudly. Yes, sir, I said, and took a step that told Victor that while I prefer wit to knuckles, I keep both in good repair. He decided his haircut had other places to be. Enjoy your orchids, he said, which in his language was a curse, and left. Fritz brought beer and a plate of sweetbreads with mushrooms that smelled like a treaty ending. Wolfe ate 3, and then put the fork down exactly where he would want to find it again. He closed his eyes and let the beer sit on his tongue before he swallowed. Men who rename debt leverage, he said, do not like being told that language is not power. That line will kill at parties, I told him. Meanwhile, Kramer's got Annabelle in a room with a typewriter and a stenographer. He'll get enough for the papers without getting enough for a mob. Kramer, Wolfe said, dislikes flourishes. He will present the forks, the glue, the cards, and the mirror. It will be adequate. Saul dropped in to leave a manila envelope on my desk. Inside were 3 photographs. The stationer's counter with Annabelle's neat hand on a receipt. A telephoto shot of Victor at a bank doorway, talking to a man whose face said he didn't like the conversation, and Yarrow in profile with a Wexford and Green poster behind him for an upcoming sale. Nothing flamboyant. Just a frame around what we already knew. Anything else? I asked. Saul scratched his cheek. Annabelle's landlord says she rearranged the hall table every week. Keys in a bowl on Tuesday, tray on Thursday. Tenants complained. She said the bowl was wrong if it didn't face the door. Wolfe made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any warmth. Compulsion dressed as competence, he said. We promote such people because they save us minutes. Then we are surprised when they take hours. The afternoon bled down to evening. The house knew its rhythm again. Orchid room at 4, beer at 6, dinner at 8. I phoned Mrs. Renshaw to confirm Fritz's recommendation about a locksmith who knows the difference between security and decoration, and to tell her Dell would send a courier with a sealed copy for her files. She thanked me in a voice that had found a flaw. Before 9, the phone rang once more. Kramer. We're booking her, he said. Your stationer will testify. The lab loves the glue. We pulled a partial print off the envelope flap that matches her toothbrush handle. Don't ask me how we got it. I didn't see anything. Also, one of the dinner forks had a pearly smudge. Lemon oil. The cook's block? House has one, I said. We pegged that scent. Good, he said. Tell Wolfe I'll send him a plant as thanks. He has orchids, I said. I'll send him a cactus, Kramer said, and hung up. I told Wolfe about the cactus. He snorted. Appropriate, he said. It endures neglect and punishes familiarity. Like you, I said. He ignored that and looked at the plate. The fork was where he had left it. The opener was at the correct angle. The bell cord drooped its usual polite curve. He surveyed his kingdom and took another sip of beer. Archie, he said. Yes, sir. There are people who think appetite is vulgar and control is sublime. They are wrong both times. He lifted the fork, balanced it by its neck on his forefinger, then let it slide back to the plate with a small click that told the room what time it was. Bring me coffee. I went to the kitchen. Fritz already had the cups warming. When I came back, the office smelled like coffee and mushrooms and orchid bark. Outside on 35th Street, a taxi honked once and moved on. Inside, the brownstone was itself, whole and inviolate, and if there was a moral waiting, it would arrive when Wolfe was ready to say it. I set his cup down at his right hand, where the fork was, as usual, exactly where it belonged. The brownstone had settled into its evening rhythm, which meant Fritz humming faintly in the kitchen and the orchids breathing in their glass temple upstairs, while Wolfe occupied his chair with a plate of cheese and a book the size of a paving stone. It would have been just another night if the bell hadn't rung at 9:30. I went to the door expecting Kramer with the cactus he'd threatened, but instead found Mrs. Renshaw, pale and still dressed as if she'd been waiting in her coat since morning. She didn't wait to be invited. Mr. Goodwin, I must speak to Mr. Wolfe at once. That tone doesn't leave room for negotiation, so I led her in. Wolfe glanced up over his book, took in the hour, the coat, and the expression, and closed it without marking the page. That, in Wolfe, is the equivalent of falling out of his chair. Madam, he said. She sat, fumbling with the clasp of her handbag. It hasn't stopped, she whispered. Annabelle is in custody, yes? Yet tonight, when I returned from the foundation, my study window was unlatched, the curtains drawn back, and on my desk, the codicil, the genuine one, Mr. Dell's, moved. Not gone, not harmed, but shifted 2 inches to the left. I felt the floor tilt under me. Wolfe's eyes closed, and for a long moment I thought he'd gone to sleep. Then he exhaled through his nose. Slowly. Describe precisely. She did. The safe had been opened, or at least disturbed. The envelope sat where it should, but the desk bore the weight of its removal. No scratches, no pry marks, only the fact that she had locked the window that morning and returned to find it loose. I called Dell to confirm the copy he had couriered was intact in his vault. It was, which meant the tampering was confined to her house. Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie. We assumed one hand. Perhaps it was two. That was enough to send me for the phone again. I rang Saul. He listened, then said, "On my way," and hung up, which is Saul's way of promising results. Mrs. Renshaw twisted her gloves. "You told me it was over," she said. "I told you Miss Lewis had exposed herself," Wolfe corrected. "I did not guarantee solitude." Within the hour, Saul arrived with the smell of cold air still on him. He dropped into the red chair, notebook in his lap. "Annabelle had a key," he said. "That explains most of it, but tonight she was locked up, which leaves Victor or Yarrow. I staked Victor's club. He left at 8, drove east, and didn't come back. Yarrow's apartment lights were out by 9, but that doesn't mean much. Both had motive to unsettle her further, Victor for leverage, Yarrow to salvage reputation." Mrs. Renshaw's voice shook. "I cannot endure another night like this." "You won't," Wolfe said. "You will remain at a hotel until I say otherwise. Archie will see you there. Saul will observe her townhouse tonight, If another hand moves objects, we will learn whose. She nodded, relieved, and let me escort her to the car. By the time she was settled at the pier under an assumed name, Saul was in position across from her house, camera ready, patience steady. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe, awake, staring at the ceiling. "It was too neat," he said. Annabel's compulsions explained much, but not all. The codicil altered to empower the treasurer. She gained nothing from that, except the risk. "Someone else steered that yarrow," I said. "Possibly." But his panic was too raw. More likely he flirted with opportunity when it appeared, then recoiled. "No, Archie. Victor. He has debts that will not wait. He has boldness without discretion. He would plant disorder to force his stepmother to sell. He would let Annabel play her games and use them as cover. It fit too well. So tonight's move. A signal," Wolfe said. "A message that despite Annabel's arrest, the pressure continues. He intends to grind her until she yields." The phone rang again. Saul. "Got him," he said. Victor entered the townhouse at 11. Spare key under a planter by the stoop. He went straight in, 30 minutes inside, left carrying nothing. I got photographs, that was the nail. Wolfe instructed Saul to hold the negatives until morning. "We will confront him here," he said. "The brownstone will not be disturbed twice." The next day, Victor came in with his gloss a little frayed. A man trying to look amused and not quite pulling it off. Wolfe didn't offer him a seat. "You trespassed again," Wolfe said without preamble. Victor blinked. "Excuse me." "Your stepmother's study," Wolfe said. "The window, the desk, the codicil shifted." Annabel could not. "You did? We have photographs." "Do not waste my time." Victor laughed, but it was brittle. "So I moved a piece of paper. Call the police if you like." "What law did I break?" "Burglary," Wolfe said. "Forgery's cousin, and harassment, which courts frown upon. But the law's not my concern. My concern is that you sought to erode your stepmother's resolve until she surrendered her house." "Phooey." Your clumsy Victor's collar rose. "And if I did? She doesn't belong there alone. The place is dead. Sell it, move on, everyone profits." "Everyone but her," Wolfe said. "She profits from order." "You attempted to deform it." "That is unforgivable," Victor sneered. "You can't stop me." "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. I slid Saul's photographs across the desk. Victor took one look, then snapped his jaw shut. "You will sign," Wolfe said, "a declaration renouncing any claim or pressure upon your stepmother's property. Mr. Dell will witness. If you do not, I will see that your creditors receive these photographs with an anonymous note. Your leverage will collapse." For a long moment, Victor's bravado hung in the air, then deflated. He signed. Dell, grim but efficient, affixed his seal. When it was over, Mrs. Renshaw returned to the brownstone, trembling but lighter. Wolfe told her the house was hers, inviolate again, and that Victor's appetite had been checked. She looked at him with gratitude she couldn't phrase. "Mr. Wolfe, you've given me peace." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Peace is an illusion. Order is not. Keep the latter, and the former will visit you." When she left, silence settled once more. Wolfe reached for his fork, lifted it, and turned it in his hand as if it were a symbol, which it was. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir." "Dinner." I went to tell Fritz. And this time, when the plates were set, every fork was where it belonged, gleaming, present, and perfectly still. It was late evening before the brownstone was itself again. The orchids were undisturbed, the bell cord hung with its usual calm weight, and Wolfe sat with a bottle of beer and the expression of a man who has proved a theorem no one had the wit to doubt in the first place. I sat across with the stack of papers Dell had left behind. Victor's signed declaration, the clean codicil, and the notes that tied the whole affair together. The brownstone had seen its share of disturbances, but tonight it felt sealed again, as if the house had shut its doors not just to the cold, but to disorder itself. Mrs. Renshaw called just after 8. Her voice, steadier now, thanked Wolfe in terms more suited to a statesman than a detective. "I slept last night," she said. "For the first time in weeks. I believe I owe you my sanity." "You owe me your retainer," Wolfe said, and let her gratitude glide past like smoke. Yet when he hung up, he closed his eyes and breathed deeper than usual. For him, that was satisfaction. I turned to him. So Annabel rearranged for the pleasure of control. Victor pressed for sale out of desperation. Yarrow toyed with the chance for discretion, then nearly drowned in it. And you— "I," Wolfe interrupted, "restored order." That was all. He tilted his glass. The fork was emblematic. But emblems matter. A house disturbed is no longer a house. It is an object in the world's hands. That cannot be tolerated. "Annabel will stand trial," I said. "Victor will be kept on a leash by his own creditors. Yarrow will keep his numbers in neat columns where they belong. That leaves Mrs. Renshaw with her house, her will, and her nerve." Wolfe sighed. "If she has learned that order is not sentimental but structural, she will endure. If she has not, then she will stumble again. But she has been taught." He put down the glass, reached for his fork, and speared the last slice of Fritz's duck in port wine. "Men like Victor believe appetite is power. Women like Miss Lewis believe control is salvation. They are both wrong. Appetite without respect is gluttony. Control without trust is tyranny. Neither feeds. Only balance nourishes." I leaned back and let him have the last word. Outside, the city droned on, traffic, horns, and footsteps of people moving in patterns they called their own. Inside, the brownstone was inviolate again, as it had to be. Wolfe finished his plate, set his fork down where it belonged, and closed his eyes. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir." "Tomorrow, no visitors." "Done," I told him, and turned out the light. And that was the end of the business of the plate left without a fork. An emblem turned weapon, a house shaken, and order restored by a man who never left his chair, 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 never left his chair,